My name is Alex. I'm 35 years old, married to the woman I thought was my soulmate, thought being the key word here. Her name's Emily. We've been together for 8 years, married for 5. No kids. We always talked about having them, but Emily said she wasn't ready. Maybe that should have been a red flag, but I was too blinded by love, too convinced we were building something real. I work in sales for a company that sends me on frequent business trips. Not too long, usually 3 or 4 days at a time. I never enjoyed leaving Emily alone, but she always insisted she was fine. She said it gave her time to unwind, to focus on herself. I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Our marriage wasn't perfect, but whose is? Sure, we argued sometimes. Emily had this knack for twisting my words, for making me feel like the bad guy even when I wasn't. She could go from loving to hostile in seconds, especially if I questioned her about anything. If I asked why she came home late, or who she was texting, she'd blow up on me, call me insecure, accuse me of not trusting her. Looking back, I see now that she was deflecting. But at the time, I always felt like maybe I was being paranoid. Last month, I left for a routine trip to Chicago. It was just a 3-day conference. I kissed Emily goodbye, told her I'd call her when I landed. She smiled and said she loved me. Everything seemed normal. When I got back, she was her usual self, smiling, affectionate, asking about my trip. There was no reason to suspect anything. But a few days later, something shifted. I can't explain it, but you know that gut feeling you get when something is off? Yeah. That. I brushed it off at first. I convinced myself it was nothing. But then I started noticing the little things. She was on her phone a lot more than usual, always turning the screen away when I walked into the room. Her responses were curt, her affection felt forced. She started picking fights over stupid things, like how I folded the laundry or left a dish in the sink. It was like she was looking for reasons to be angry with me. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was just stressed. I even felt guilty for doubting her. But then, one night I caught her lying. A small lie. She told me she was going out with her friend Lisa for dinner. Fine. But later that night, I checked Lisa's Instagram out of boredom. Lisa was at home, posting stories about her dog. When Emily came back, I asked her how dinner was. She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Great! We had sushi." I nodded, pretending to believe her, but something inside me snapped. That night, while she slept, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. It was locked, but I knew her passcode. My hands were shaking as I opened her messages. Most were normal. Harmless. But then I saw a chat labeled work. It was just a generic name, one I'd never questioned before. I clicked on it, my heart pounding. The first message hit me like a punch to the gut. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was incredible." The message was from him. Some guy named Brian. They'd been texting for months. I scrolled through the messages, my vision blurring with rage and disbelief. It was all there, the flirting, the secret meetups, the late-night confessions. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My whole world was shattering, piece by piece, and she was lying peacefully in bed, completely unaware that I knew. I didn't confront her that night. I needed more proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes. So I decided to wait, to bide my time, to let her think everything was normal. But I knew the storm was coming. And when it did, it would destroy everything. I woke up the next morning with a knot in my stomach. Emily was in the kitchen, humming softly while she made coffee, like nothing had happened. I watched her for a moment, my mind buzzing with the truth I'd uncovered the night before. The woman I'd loved, trusted, and built a life with was a stranger now. A liar. A cheater. But I stayed calm. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. If I exploded now, she'd deny everything or twist it until I was the villain. No, I needed more. I needed to catch her red-handed, with no way out. She turned and smiled at me. "Morning, babe. Coffee?" "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Thanks." Her smile was warm, but all I could see was the lie behind it. I took the coffee and sipped it, my hand steady even though I felt like I was about to shatter. "How'd you sleep?" she asked casually. "Fine," I lied. "You?" She stretched, yawning. "Like a rock. You know me, once I'm out, I'm out." Her words made me sick. I knew exactly what she was doing when she wasn't sleeping. But I played along. I nodded, took another sip of coffee, and pretended everything was normal. I left for work as usual, but the moment I was out the door, I felt like I could finally breathe. The fresh air hit me, and I realized how suffocated I'd been in that house. My mind was a storm, but I had one goal now: gather evidence, build a case, and end this nightmare. At work, I could barely focus. The hours crawled by. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart jumped, half expecting it to be another clue, another dagger to the heart. But it was just the usual nonsense: emails, reminders, calls from clients. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped outside, dialing a number I never thought I'd need: a private investigator. His name was Alan, and his voice was gruff, no nonsense. "This is Alan. How can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "I need you to follow my wife. I think she's cheating on me." There was a pause. Then, calmly, he said, "All right. You ready for whatever I find?" "Yes," I said, though the word felt like a stone in my throat. "I need the truth." We set up a meeting for that afternoon. Alan's office was a small, cluttered space that smelled like old coffee and cigarette smoke. He looked exactly how I imagined a PI would: late 50s, weathered face, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He gestured for me to sit. "Tell me what you know." I laid it all out. The texts, the late nights, the gut feeling I couldn't shake. His face stayed neutral, but I could tell he'd heard it all before. "All right," he said, jotting down notes. "I'll start tonight. If she's meeting this guy, we'll know soon enough." I nodded, my mouth dry. "Thank you." As I left his office, a grim sense of relief settled over me. The wheels were in motion now. The truth was coming, whether I was ready or not. That night, I went home and tried to act normal. Emily was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile on her lips. My stomach twisted. Was she texting him right now? She looked up. "Hey, you're home early." "Yeah, slow day," I said, forcing a smile. "What's for dinner?" "Thought we'd order in," she said, stretching. "I didn't feel like cooking." "Sounds good," I replied, my voice hollow. We ate Chinese takeout in front of the TV. She laughed at the sitcom we were watching, but I barely heard it. My mind was a million miles away, imagining where she'd be tomorrow, what Alan might find. After dinner, she kissed my cheek. "I'm gonna take a bath." "Okay," I murmured. She walked upstairs, and the moment she was out of sight, I felt the mask slip. My hands shook as I cleaned up the takeout containers. The woman I loved was upstairs, living a lie, and I was trapped in it with her. At midnight I got a text from Alan. "She's meeting him tomorrow night at the Westbridge Hotel. Room 217. I'll have photos and video." My heart pounded as I read the message. This was it. The confirmation I needed. The proof that would shatter everything. I stared at the ceiling for hours that night, unable to sleep, my mind a whirlwind of rage, grief, and a terrible, cold clarity. Tomorrow, the truth would come out. And nothing would ever be the same again. The next day felt like an eternity. I went through the motions at work, pretending to care about emails and meetings, but my mind was locked on what was coming that night. Every tick of the clock was a reminder that my life was about to change forever. I kept checking my phone, half expecting a message from Alan, or maybe even a message from Emily saying she couldn't make her plans tonight. But nothing. She was playing her role perfectly, the devoted wife, the woman who loved me. The lie was seamless. By the time the workday ended, my nerves were frayed. I drove home, every muscle in my body tense. Emily's car was in the driveway when I got there. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. She was in the kitchen, her back to me, humming a tune while she chopped vegetables. She turned and smiled like everything was normal. "Hey, babe! How was your day?" I forced a smile. "Fine. You?" "Oh, you know, the usual," she said, her voice light and casual. "Lisa wants me to meet her for dinner tonight. She's having a rough week." "Lisa." The same damn lie. I nodded slowly. "That's nice of you. Tell her I said hi." "I will," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I felt her lips brush my skin, and it took everything I had not to recoil. "Don't wait up, okay? I might be late." I swallowed the bitterness rising in my throat. "Sure. Have fun." She smiled, grabbing her purse. "Love you." "Love you too," I lied. The door closed behind her, and the house fell silent. I let out a shaky breath, my hands clenched into fists. The mask was gone now. My heart was pounding with a mix of fury and dread. I met Alan outside the Westbridge Hotel just before 8 p.m. The neon lights flickered overhead, casting a cold glow on the parking lot. Alan leaned against his car, a grim expression on his face. "You ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, my jaw tight. "Yeah. I need to see it." He handed me a small earpiece. "I'll be recording everything. You'll hear and see what's going on inside." My stomach churned as I put the earpiece in. The thought of what I was about to witness made me want to vomit, but I had to know. I had to see the truth with my own eyes. Alan nodded toward the hotel. "They're in room 217. Let's go." We walked inside, the lobby quiet and sterile. The receptionist barely glanced at us as we made our way to the elevator. My heart felt like a jackhammer in my chest. The elevator doors closed, and Alan's voice was steady. "Whatever happens, remember to stay calm. You're here for the truth, not a fight." I took a deep breath and nodded. "I know." The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. We stepped into a hallway, the carpet muffling our footsteps. Alan pointed to the door at the end of the hall. "Room 217, he whispered. I swallowed hard, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around and run. But I couldn't. I had to see this through. Alan knocked on the door, his face a mask of professionalism. There was a pause, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, and a man's face appeared. Brian. His eyes widened in surprise and then narrowed in anger. "What the hell?" I shoved the door open, my heart pounding. The room was dimly lit, but I saw everything clearly. Emily was on the bed, wrapped in a sheet, her eyes going wide with panic. Her face turned pale, and her mouth opened in a horrified gasp. "Hey, Alex?" she stammered. "What are you doing here?" I couldn't speak. My throat felt like it was closing up. The air in the room was thick with the smell of sweat and betrayal. Brian stepped forward, his jaw clenched. "You need to leave." I turned my icy gaze on him. "Shut the fuck up." Emily scrambled off the bed, clutching the sheet to her chest. "Alex, please. It's not what it looks like. I can explain." A bitter laugh escaped me. "Explain? I just caught you in bed with him, Emily. What's left to explain?" She started crying, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I was lonely. You're always gone." I shook my head, the rage boiling over. You made a choice, Emily. Over and over again. Her face twisted, and she screamed, her voice shrill. You think you're perfect? You think this is all my fault? Yes, I said coldly. It is. Brian sneered. You hurt her, man. You weren't there for her. This is on you. My hands shook with the effort of holding back the violence bubbling inside me. You're a piece of shit, Brian. Emily's tears turned to fury. You'll regret this, Alex. You're ruining everything. No, Emily, I said, my voice cold and steady. You did that all by yourself. I turned and walked out of the room, my heart hammering in my chest. Behind me, I could hear Emily screaming and Brian cursing, but I didn't care. The door slammed shut, and the hallway felt impossibly quiet. Alan followed me, his expression unreadable. You okay? I let out a shaky breath, my vision blurring. No. But I will be. I walked out of the hotel, the door closing behind me with a soft thud that felt louder than a gunshot. The cold night air hit me, and I sucked in a deep breath, trying to steady the storm inside my chest. My heart was still pounding, my hands trembling. The image of Emily wrapped in that sheet, her face twisted in panic and rage, burned in my mind like a scar I'd never be able to erase. Alan followed close behind, his footsteps quiet, measured. He didn't say anything, just walked beside me to my car. I leaned against the door, staring up at the dark sky, my breath coming out in ragged bursts. You did the right thing, Alan said quietly. I barked out a bitter laugh. The right thing? I feel like I just walked out of a nightmare, only to find out I'm still in it. He nodded slowly. It's going to hurt for a while. But you needed to see it. Now you know the truth. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Yeah. Now I know. After a moment, Alan cleared his throat. Listen, I'll send you the photos and video. You've got all the proof you need. Whatever you decide to do next, you've got the evidence to back you up. I nodded, my voice hollow. Thanks, Alan. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of rough comfort. Take care of yourself, Alex. And if you need anything, you know where to find me. He walked off into the night, leaving me standing there, alone. I climbed into my car, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The anger, the betrayal, the humiliation, it all threatened to swallow me whole. I took a deep breath, trying to push it down. Not here. Not now. I needed to get away. From the hotel. From the lies. From everything. I drove aimlessly for a while, the city lights blurring past me. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't go home. Not yet. The house I shared with Emily felt like a prison now, the walls soaked with her deceit. Eventually, I found myself pulling into Jason's driveway. My best friend. The one person who knew me well enough not to ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I sat there for a moment, staring at his front door, the lights spilling out onto the porch. It felt like a beacon, a reminder that not everything in my life was broken. The door opened before I could knock. Jason stood there, his face lined with worry. He took one look at me and stepped aside. Come in, man. I walked inside, the warmth of his place wrapping around me like a blanket. He closed the door behind me and gestured to the couch. Sit down. You want a drink? Yeah, I muttered. Whiskey. Anything strong. He nodded and disappeared into the kitchen. I sank onto the couch, my body feeling like it was made of lead. My mind was still spinning, the anger and pain crashing into each other like waves during a storm. Jason came back with 2 glasses of whiskey and handed me one. He sat down beside me, his eyes sharp but patient. All right, he said. Tell me what happened. I stared into the amber liquid, my voice flat. I caught her. Red-handed. At the Westbridge Hotel. With him. Jason's jaw tightened, his knuckles widening around his glass. Jesus. I'm so sorry, man. I took a sip of the whiskey, the burn cutting through the numbness. She lied to my face. Over and over. And I let her. I believed her. That's on her, not you, Jason said, his voice firm. You trusted her because you loved her. That's not weakness, Alex. I shook my head. It feels like it. Like I was a goddamn fool. He leaned back, his eyes hard. She's the fool. She threw away a good man for what? Some cheap fling? That's on her. I let his words sink in, but the anger didn't subside. It sat there, smoldering, waiting to erupt. I'm done, I said quietly. I'm going to file for divorce. Jason nodded. Good. You deserve better than this shit. I trailed off, the words catching in my throat. I thought I knew her. I thought we were building something real. Jason didn't say anything. He just sat with me, the silence heavy but comforting. He knew there was nothing he could say to take the pain away. But just having him there, not judging, not offering false hope, it helped. More than I cared to admit. Eventually, I crashed on his couch, the exhaustion finally winning out. My dreams were a chaotic mess of broken memories and twisted lies. I kept seeing Emily's face, hearing her voice, the betrayal echoing through my mind. When I woke up, the sun was streaming through the windows, too bright, too cheerful for how I felt inside. Jason was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He looked over. You sleep at all? Barely, I muttered, rubbing my eyes. He slid a mug of coffee toward me. You're going to get through this, Alex? I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my hands. I hope so. He nodded. You will. One step at a time. I sipped the coffee, the bitterness grounding me. I knew he was right. The storm wasn't over, but at least now I knew which way the wind was blowing. And I was ready to face it head on. I spent the rest of the morning at Jason's place, nursing my coffee while my mind kept replaying everything that had happened. The confrontation at the hotel, Emily's desperate lies, Brian's smug face, it all swirled together in a toxic stew of anger and disbelief. Jason gave me space, letting me process in silence. He knew me well enough to know I wasn't ready to talk yet. But eventually, the quiet became suffocating. I needed to do something. I set the empty coffee mug down with a thud. I need to see a lawyer. Today. Jason nodded, his jaw tight. I know a good one. Karen Bishop. She handled my cousin's divorce. No nonsense, sharp as hell. I took a deep breath and nodded. Call her. The sooner I get this started, the better. An hour later, I was sitting in Karen Bishop's sleek, modern office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of the city, but I barely noticed. My focus was on the woman sitting across from me. Karen was in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a demeanor that screamed competence. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the notes I'd given her. All right, Alex. You have the evidence, texts, photos, videos. This is clear-cut infidelity. I nodded, my voice flat. Yeah. I want this done quickly. No drawn-out fights. No more lies. Karen's lips curled into a thin smile. I can do that. We'll file for divorce on the grounds of adultery. Given the evidence, she won't have much room to contest it. Are there any joint assets I need to know about? The house. Some joint accounts. No kids. She nodded, jotting down notes. That makes things simpler. You're entitled to an even split of the assets, but given her infidelity, we might be able to negotiate more in your favor. I exhaled slowly. I just want it over with. She looked up, her gaze steady. You understand this won't be easy. Even with the evidence, divorces get messy. She might try to spin things, make you out to be the bad guy. I laughed bitterly. She's been doing that for months. Karen leaned back in her chair. Good. Then you're ready for whatever she throws at you. She paused. We'll serve her the papers tomorrow. Do you know where she'll be? At home, I said. She doesn't have a clue this is coming. Karen's smile turned cold. Perfect. Let's give her a wake-up call. That night, I returned to the house. The place felt foreign, like I was walking into someone else's life. Emily was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her phone, scrolling through social media. When she looked up, her smile was so fake it made my skin crawl. Hey, you're home, she said sweetly. I was thinking we could order pizza. Movie night? I clenched my jaw, forcing a neutral expression. Sure. Sounds good. Her eyes searched my face, maybe looking for signs that I knew something. But I'd gotten good at hiding the storm inside me. She turned back to her phone, completely unaware that her world was about to shatter. The next morning, I left early, unable to stand being in the same room with her any longer. I drove to a coffee shop and waited for Karen's call. It came at exactly 9 a.m. It's done, she said. The papers have been served. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. How did she take it? Karen chuckled darkly. Not well. Screaming, crying, the works. But that's her problem now. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. This was the end of something that had once been beautiful. But it was also the beginning of freedom. I didn't hear from Emily all day. No texts, no calls. The silence was unnerving, but I wasn't about to break it. She knew where I stood now. There was no going back. That evening, as I sat on Jason's couch, my phone finally buzzed. It was a message from Emily. Emily, how could you do this to me? You're throwing everything away. I didn't mean to hurt you. Please, let's talk. A bitter laugh escaped my throat. She still didn't get it. She was the one who had thrown everything away. I stared at the message, my fingers hovering over the screen. Finally, I typed out a reply. Me. There's nothing left to talk about. You made your choice. I hit send and blocked her number. Jason looked over at me. That it? Yeah, I said quietly. That's it. For the first time in months, I felt like I was free. The chains of betrayal, the lies, the constant doubt, they were gone. All that was left was the wreckage, and the long road to rebuilding my life. But at least now, I was walking that road alone, and on my own terms. I didn't sleep that night. Even with Emily's number blocked, my mind kept replaying everything over and over. The lies. The betrayal. The cold, hard finality of knowing the woman I once loved was gone forever. The silence in Jason's guest room was oppressive, and the weight of it all pressed down on me like a suffocating blanket. By morning, I was running on fumes. Jason found me in the kitchen nursing a cup of black coffee, my eyes gritty and hollow. You look like hell, he said, leaning against the counter. I huffed out a humorless laugh. I feel worse. He sat down across from me, his expression serious. You did the right thing. Cutting her out of your life was the only way forward. I know, I muttered. But it still feels like I lost something. Even if that something was a lie. Jason nodded slowly. Yeah. It's going to feel that way for a while. But eventually it'll get better. You'll see. I wanted to believe him. But right now, all I could see was the wreckage. Later that morning, my lawyer Karen called. Her voice was brisk, professional. Alex, we've got a bit of a situation. I tensed, gripping the phone tighter. What kind of situation? Emily's hired a lawyer. She's contesting the divorce terms. She wants a bigger share of the assets. A cold fury settled in my gut. You've got to be kidding me. She cheats on me, and now she wants more money? Karen sighed. Unfortunately, infidelity doesn't always guarantee a favorable outcome. But don't worry. We've got the evidence. Her case is weak. This is just a desperate move. I exhaled sharply. What do we do? We fight back. I'll handle the legal side. Just be prepared, she's going to drag this out and make it as painful as possible. I clenched my jaw. Fine. Let her try. Over the next few days, the legal battle began. Emily's lawyer sent demand after demand, trying to squeeze every penny out of me. The woman who once claimed to love me was now treating me like an ATM she could shake dry. I stayed at Jason's, trying to keep my head above water. The anger was always there, simmering just beneath the surface. But more than that, there was a deep, aching sadness. The realization that the person I thought I knew had never really existed. One evening, Jason and I were watching TV when my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. You think you're going to win? You have no idea what's coming. I stared at the message, my blood running cold. Jason glanced over. Another threat? Yeah, I muttered. Could be Emily. Could be Brian. Jason frowned. We need to figure out who's behind this. You can't keep living with this hanging over you. I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. I think it's time to hit back harder. The next morning, I met with Melissa at a coffee shop downtown. She looked as exhausted as I felt, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't dimmed. They're pushing you too? She asked, stirring her coffee. Yeah, I said, my voice tight. Emily's contesting the divorce. And I'm getting threats now. I don't know if it's her, Brian, or someone else. Her jaw clenched. They don't know when to quit. I want to finish this, I said, meeting her eyes. No more waiting for them to strike. We take the fight to them. She nodded slowly, her gaze hardening. I'm with you. What's the plan? I took a deep breath. We dig up everything. Every dirty secret, every lie. We expose them completely. No more half measures. A small, grim smile spread across her face. Let's burn it all down. We spent the next few days gathering everything we had, texts, photos, emails. Melissa had even more dirt on Brian than I realized. Financial misdeeds at work, shady dealings with clients. He was neck-deep in trouble, and we were about to push him under completely. Karen helped us compile it all into a dossier. It was airtight. When we were done, we had enough to ruin them both, personally and professionally. As I looked at the pile of evidence, a strange sense of calm settled over me. This was the endgame. The final blow. You sure about this? Jason asked, glancing over my shoulder. Yeah, I said, my voice steady. They need to face the consequences. He clapped me on the back. Then let's do it. The next morning, we sent the dossier out. To Emily's law firm. To Brian's former employer. To every mutual friend who still didn't know the full story. We let the truth fly free, like a wrecking ball aimed at the facade they'd so carefully built. It didn't take long for the fallout to start. Emily's firm announced they were conducting an internal investigation into unethical behavior. Word spread quickly, colleagues whispering behind her back, friends turning their backs on her. She called, she texted, but I ignored every message. I didn't owe her anything anymore. Brian's fate was even worse. The financial misdeeds we uncovered led to a full investigation. His reputation was shot, his future in tatters. He went from smug to desperate overnight. The threats stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, but it was a relief. The storm was finally over. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant streaks of orange and purple, Melissa and I sat on a park bench, watching the sky. It's done, she said softly. Yeah, I said. It's finally over. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything we'd been through finally lifting. The betrayal, the lies, the anger, they were still there, but they didn't control us anymore. We survived, she said, smiling faintly. I nodded. Yeah. We did. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but at least now, it was my road. And I was ready to walk it. The dust had finally settled, or at least it seemed that way. The legal battle was in motion, the truth was out, and Emily's carefully crafted lies were crumbling. But despite the progress, a strange emptiness lingered in my chest. It was like standing in the ruins of a once beautiful building. The structure was gone, but the echoes of what it used to be still haunted me. Jason and I sat on his back porch that evening, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting everything in shades of gray. He handed me a beer, the cold bottle sweating against my palm. "How you holding up?" he asked. I took a sip, the bitterness familiar and grounding. "I don't know. I thought I'd feel more happier. Relieved, maybe. But I just feel numb." He nodded, leaning back in his chair. "That's normal, man. You've been through hell. It's gonna take time to process everything." "I know," I muttered. "It's just weird. I spent years building a life with her. And now, it's like none of it was real." Jason sighed. "It was real to you. That's what matters. Just because she turned out to be a liar doesn't mean your feelings weren't real." I stared into the distance, his words settling over me. Maybe he was right. Maybe the love I had felt wasn't a lie, even if she was. But it still felt like a betrayal of everything I thought I knew about myself. My phone buzzed on the table, dragging me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen, a message from Karen. "Karen, Emily's lawyer reached out. She wants to meet. Says she has a proposal." Jason saw the look on my face. "What is it?" I exhaled sharply. "Emily wants to meet. She has some kind of proposal." He frowned. "You think it's legit?" I shook my head. "No idea. But I need to find out." Jason leaned forward, his eyes serious. "You want me to come with you?" "No," I said, my jaw tight. "I need to do this alone." The next morning, I sat in a conference room at Karen's office, waiting. The room was cold, sterile, the hum of the fluorescent lights drilling into my brain. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I wouldn't give Emily the satisfaction of seeing me rattled. The door opened, and she walked in. For a moment, I barely recognized her. She looked tired, worn down, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. The confidence, the smugness, it was all gone. What was left was a shell of the woman I used to know. She sat across from me, her lawyer by her side. Karen took her seat next to me, her expression unreadable. Emily's eyes met mine, and for a second, I saw something flicker there, regret maybe. Or just the realization that she had finally lost control. Her lawyer cleared his throat. "We're here to propose a settlement. Emily is willing to drop her claims for additional assets if you agree to finalize the divorce quickly and quietly. No more fighting. No more public exposure." I leaned back in my chair, my eyes narrowing. "Why the sudden change of heart?" Emily's voice was soft, shaky. "I just want this to be over, Alex. For both of us." I stared at her, the anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. "Now you want it to be over? After dragging me through the mud? After lying, cheating, and trying to bleed me dry?" She flinched, tears pooling in her eyes. "I made mistakes. I know that. But I can't keep doing this. Either of us can." A bitter laugh escaped me. "You didn't care about that when you were in his bed. When you were lying to my face every single day." Her tears finally spilled over, but they didn't move me. They were too little, too late. Karen spoke up, her voice cool and professional. "We'll review the proposal and get back to you." Emily's lawyer nodded, standing up. "We'll be in touch." Emily lingered for a moment, her eyes pleading. "Alex, I really am sorry." I met her gaze, my voice cold and steady. "Sorry doesn't fix this. You don't get to apologize and walk away like nothing happened." She nodded, her shoulders sagging. "Goodbye, Alex." I didn't say it back. I just watched her walk out the door, leaving behind nothing but the wreckage she'd created. Later that day, Karen and I went over the proposal. It was straightforward. She'd drop her claim for more money, and we'd finalize the divorce quietly. No more court battles, no more drama. "It's a good deal," Karen said. "You could fight for more, but this would end things cleanly." I thought about it, the weight of the past few months pressing down on me. I was tired of the lies, the fights, the endless anger. Maybe it was time to close the book and start a new one. "Let's do it," I said. "I want this over." Karen nodded. "I'll take care of the paperwork." A week later it was done. The divorce was finalized. Emily was out of my life for good. I stood outside the courthouse, the sun shining down, the air crisp and clear. It was over. Really over. The chapter had closed, and a new one was waiting to be written. Jason was waiting by my car, a grin on his face. "You did it." "Yeah," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "I did." He clapped me on the back. "Let's go get a drink. You've earned it." I nodded, a sense of lightness filling my chest. For the first time in months, the future felt open, filled with possibilities instead of dread. We drove away, the past finally in the rearview mirror. And I was ready to move forward. The finality of the divorce settled over me in waves. Some days, the relief felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Other days, it felt like a void I didn't know how to fill. The life I had built, or thought I had built, was gone. In its place was an empty space I wasn't sure how to navigate. Jason and I sat in the dimly lit bar downtown, the neon sign flickering outside the window. It was the kind of place where people went to forget, or maybe to remember, depending on their poison. I stared into my whiskey, the amber liquid swirling with reflections of the past. Jason took a sip of his beer and leaned back in his chair. "So, what now?" I exhaled slowly, feeling the question hit me in a place I wasn't ready to face. "I don't know. Start over, I guess." He nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "Starting over isn't the worst thing. It's a chance to build something new. Something better." I chuckled bitterly. "Yeah. But where do I even begin?" Jason tilted his head, considering me. "You begin by figuring out what you want. Not what you think you should want. What you want." I let his words hang in the air, the truth of them sinking in. For so long, I'd been living a life I thought was secure, predictable. Now that it had been torn apart, I realized I had no idea what I really wanted. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, half expecting another unknown number or a message from Emily I didn't want to see. But it wasn't. It was a message from Melissa. "Melissa. Hey. Just checking in. How are you holding up?" I stared at the message for a moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Melissa, the one person who truly understood what I was going through. She'd been betrayed too, her life shattered by the same people who wrecked mine. We'd fought this battle together, but now that it was over, a new question loomed: what now? I typed out a reply. "Me. I'm managing. Barely. You?" Her response came quickly. "Melissa. Same. It's weird, isn't it?" The silence. I knew exactly what she meant. The chaos was gone, but the silence left a strange emptiness. "Me. Yeah. Feels like I should be doing something, but I don't know what." "Melissa. Want to get coffee?" No pressure. Just two people trying to figure out what the hell comes next. I hesitated, a flicker of doubt rising in my chest. But then I realized I didn't want to sit here, drowning in my own thoughts. I wanted to see her. To talk. To feel like I wasn't alone in this. Me. Yeah. I'd like that. The coffee shop was quiet when I arrived. The hum of conversation and clinking cups created a comfortable backdrop. Melissa was already there, sitting by the window, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up as I walked in, her eyes warm but weary. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey," I replied, sliding into the seat across from her. For a moment, we just sat there, the weight of everything hanging between us. Then she smiled, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "We made it," she said. I nodded. "Yeah. Barely." She laughed, a sound that was more relief than joy. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like maybe it's not really over." "I know what you mean," I said, my fingers tracing the rim of my cup. "But maybe this is it. Maybe we're finally on the other side." She looked out the window, her eyes distant. "I don't know what to do with myself. I spent so much time fighting, being angry. Now it's just quiet." "The quiet's hard," I admitted. "But maybe it's a chance to figure things out." She nodded, her gaze meeting mine. "Maybe. I just don't want to feel like I'm stuck in the past." "You're not," I said firmly. "We're not." A moment of silence stretched between us. Then she reached out, her hand resting lightly on mine. "Thanks, Alex. For everything. I don't know how I would have gotten through this without you." I squeezed her hand gently. "You don't have to thank me. We got through it together." Her eyes shimmered with emotion, but she blinked it away. "So what now? For you, I mean." I thought about Jason's words. "What do you want?" "I don't know yet," I said honestly. "But I want to figure it out. One step at a time." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Me too." For the first time in a long time, the future didn't seem like a black hole of uncertainty. It felt open, filled with possibilities I hadn't considered before. Maybe Melissa and I were just two broken people trying to find our way. Or maybe, just maybe, we were on the verge of something new. Whatever it was, I wasn't afraid to find out. The days that followed felt strange, like I was standing on the edge of a new life, not quite sure how to take the first step. The routine of waking up, going to work, and pretending everything was normal was gone. My life felt like a blank slate, and it was terrifying. Melissa and I texted often, sometimes about nothing, sometimes about everything. We both knew we were standing at similar crossroads, trying to figure out what the future looked like. She was one of the few people who understood exactly what I was feeling. One evening, Jason and I were having dinner at his place. The conversation drifted between small talk and silence. He could tell I was stuck in my head. "You still thinking about everything?" he asked, his eyes steady. I nodded, pushing my fork around my plate. "Yeah. It's like I know it's over, but I don't know how to move on." Jason leaned back in his chair. "You don't have to have it all figured out right away. But you can't stay in limbo forever. At some point, you've got to take a step forward." "I know," I muttered. "I just don't know what that step is." He took a sip of his beer, then shrugged. "Maybe it's not about knowing exactly what the step is. Maybe it's just about doing something. Anything that feels like moving forward." His words lingered in my mind long after dinner was over. Do something. Take a step. The simplicity of it made sense. I didn't need to know what the future held. I just needed to stop standing still. The next day, Melissa sent me a text. "Melissa, you busy tonight?" I hesitated for only a second before replying. "Me? No. What's up?" "Melissa, Feel like getting out of here for a bit? Maybe a drive? A smile tugged at my lips. A drive. No destination. Just motion. It sounded like exactly what I needed. Me. Yeah. Pick you up at 7? Melissa. Perfect. When I pulled up to Melissa's place that evening, she was waiting on the front steps. Her hair was down, blowing gently in the breeze, and she wore a simple jacket and jeans. She looked free. Or maybe she was trying to be, just like I was. She climbed into the passenger seat and smiled. Hey. Hey, I replied, starting the engine. Any idea where you want to go? She shook her head. Anywhere but here. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. I pulled out onto the road, the hum of the engine filling the silence. The city lights blurred past us, gradually giving way to open roads and long stretches of darkness. For a while, we didn't speak. The quiet between us was comfortable, a shared understanding that words weren't necessary right now. The road stretched out ahead, endless and open. It felt like freedom. Eventually, Melissa broke the silence. It's weird, isn't it? How everything we thought we knew is gone now. Yeah, I said softly. It's like living in a house that burned down. All you can do is rebuild. She nodded, staring out the window. I used to think I knew exactly how my life was going to go. Brian and I had plans, or at least I thought we did. Now, I don't know. It feels like starting over from scratch. Maybe starting over isn't so bad, I said, my hands steady on the wheel. We get to decide what happens next. No more lies. No more pretending. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching mine. Do you really believe that? I met her gaze, feeling a spark of something real, something I hadn't felt in a long time. I want to. She smiled faintly. Me too. We drove until the stars filled the sky, the glow of the city long behind us. I pulled over at a lookout point, the view stretching out before us, rolling hills under a blanket of darkness, the faint glow of distant lights on the horizon. We got out of the car, the night air crisp and cool. Melissa leaned against the hood, her eyes reflecting the starlight. This feels different, she murmured. Like we're finally out of the storm. I nodded, standing beside her. Yeah. For the first time, I feel like we're not just surviving. We're living. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing. It's scary, though. Not knowing what comes next. Maybe that's the point, I said quietly. Maybe not knowing is what makes it worth figuring out. She looked at me, her expression softening. I guess we'll figure it out together. I smiled, a genuine smile that felt strange but good. Yeah. Together. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a void. It felt like a chance. A chance to build something new, something real. Maybe with Melissa. Maybe on my own. Either way, it was mine to shape. And for the first time, that was enough. The drive back to the city was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy silence of despair or confusion. It was the kind of quiet that felt peaceful, filled with the unspoken understanding between two people who had survived the same storm and come out the other side. The weight on my chest felt lighter now, as if every mile we drove was putting more distance between me and the pain I'd been carrying for months. Melissa leaned her head against the window, the street lights casting fleeting shadows across her face. I caught glimpses of her in the glow, her eyes soft, her expression calm. It was the calm that came after the fight was over, when the bruises were still tender, but healing had already begun. I finally pulled up in front of her place. The clock on the dashboard read 11:45 p.m. We sat there for a moment, the engine idling, neither of us wanting to break the quiet. She turned to me, a small smile tugging at her lips. Thanks for tonight, Alex. I needed this. Me too, I admitted. It felt good to just be for a while. No drama. No chaos. She nodded, her fingers tracing a pattern on her jeans. Yeah. It felt like a piece of normal life. I chuckled softly. Whatever normal is. She laughed, and the sound was genuine. It felt good to hear it, to know we could still laugh despite everything that had happened. Melissa's smile faded slightly, her eyes serious now. You know, we don't have to figure everything out right away. We don't have to force anything. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. We can just see where it goes. Yeah. She hesitated, then reached out, her fingers brushing my hand. But whatever happens, I'm glad we went through this together. It made everything a little less impossible. I squeezed her hand gently. Same here. She lingered for a moment longer, then let go and opened the door. Good night, Alex. Good night, Melissa. She walked up the steps to her front door, pausing to give me one last smile before disappearing inside. I sat there for a minute, the night air drifting through the open window. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't dreading what came next. I didn't know what the future held, but I didn't need to know. That was the beauty of it. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through Jason's guest room window. I stretched, feeling a strange sense of freedom. The fog of anger and betrayal was still there, but it wasn't suffocating anymore. It was just a part of my story now, not the whole thing. I showered, got dressed, and made my way to the kitchen, where Jason was flipping pancakes. He glanced over his shoulder and grinned. Look who finally decided to join the land of the living. I laughed, the sound surprising even me. Guess I'm not a zombie anymore. He slid a plate of pancakes toward me. You seem different today. I nodded, pouring syrup over the stack. I feel different. For the first time in a long time, I'm ready to stop looking back. Jason sat down across from me, his expression softening. Good. You deserve that. As I took a bite, my phone buzzed with a notification. I glanced at the screen. It was a message from Karen. Karen, just a heads up, everything's finalized. The divorce is officially closed. It's done. I stared at the words for a moment, letting them sink in. It was done. The chapter with Emily was finally, completely closed. I wasn't tied to her anymore. The betrayal, the lies, they couldn't touch me now. I exhaled slowly, a weight I didn't even realize I was still carrying slipping away. Jason noticed. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, a real smile spreading across my face. It's finally over. He raised his coffee mug. To new beginnings. I clinked my glass of orange juice against his. To new beginnings. That afternoon, I decided to take a walk. The weather was perfect, warm sunlight, a gentle breeze. I didn't have a destination in mind, I just let my feet carry me wherever they wanted to go. Eventually, I found myself at the park where Melissa and I had sat after everything came crashing down. The same bench. The same view of the horizon. But everything felt different now. I sat down, closing my eyes and taking a deep breath. The air felt cleaner, the world more open. I wasn't trapped in the past anymore. The future wasn't a dark void, it was a canvas, waiting for me to decide what to paint on it. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Melissa. Melissa. Hey, want to grab a coffee later? No pressure. I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. Me. I'd love that. I slipped my phone back into my pocket, stood up, and started walking. One step forward. Then another. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly where I was going.